The Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the CSIR, has released its annual statistics on power generation for 2021. The report paints a bleak picture of Eskom power plants and their reliability. It further says breakdowns have increased substantially since 2018. To unpack this report, CSIR researcher Warwick Pierce joins us now from Hermanus in Cape Town. Warwick, good evening and thank you for your time. We'll get to the slightly improving picture around the contribution of renewable energy, but I suspect on an evening when Eskom earlier on had warned us that the grid is under pressure, if there's any breakdowns, they may be forced to implement what we've come to know as load shedding, blackouts across the country. What is the picture that is emerging around the system reliability, the power plant reliability from your work?
So the work that we did is look at historic data that's been provided by Eskom. And in short, the metric that you might have referred to, the energy availability factor, is sort of providing a indication of the availability or the functionality of the Eskom fleet, and we've been seeing a downward trend with that for quite a few years now, and unfortunately that trend is continuing downwards, and we're seeing load shedding increasing as well. So last year, 2021, was the worst year for load shedding.
And in terms of where Eskom had placed us, they had a base case being the best scenario, and I think I'm looking for it here where they talked about base case plus 1,500 megawatts, which was sort of middle ground. And then they had this worst case scenario where they said base case plus 3,000 megawatts. You make the point in your report that by the time they made those predictions of how bad things would be, we're already past the base case scenario. So from your reading of the plant reliability, energy availability factor and other factors, where do you think we are headed? Are we headed for this worst case scenario that Eskom had painted of over 100 days of load shedding?
Yeah, unfortunately, as you mentioned, it's not particularly positive because we're still on a downward trend in terms of the energy availability factor. So I think the short answer is things will need to first stabilize before it improves. We as a country shouldn't accept load shedding, but I think we should get used to it for a couple more years. And unfortunately, anything that works in the electricity supply industry, so power plants, take a long lead time. So even if you had a magic wand right now, it would still take time to turn around.
Yeah, and I wonder how deeply you go into monitoring perhaps the performance of specific plants. I've got a few on my mind that, Warwick, when I hear that something has happened at Tutuga Power Station, I just know, oh my goodness, here we go again. We are going to be sitting in the dark. Medupi, as new as it is, whenever something happens there, I just know something is going to happen. I can go on and on and on. But the point I'm trying to make is that we are dealing here with a plant, that's on average about 40 years or so. So what can you share about trends in which ones break down the most?
So we don't have specific data for the Eskom power stations. It's provided as a group, so we just see coal power stations as one. That information we don't have from Eskom. But you're correct in stating that for instance, the newer plants, Kusile and Medupi, we paid quite a heavy price as a country for them, but unfortunately we're not getting the megawatts out of it. So those sort of new, bright and shiny power plants aren't providing the output that they should be. So again, if the country could, wave a magic wand, or the president could wave a magic wand and say, well, let's build a coal power station overnight, we would need another Kusile, a fully operational Kusile, sort of 4,500 megawatts, and then we should be out of this electricity crisis.
Yeah, and hopefully we wouldn't give it to incompetent contractors who would do a shoddy job, with the result that we would be trying to finish it for the next decade or so. Warwick, one of the other measures that you looked at is energy demand, right? Just tell me what emerged from there. You're saying that it increased somewhat, but it's still lower than what it was in 2019.
Yeah, so this is the sort of the bittersweetness of COVID, because actually COVID, there was a drop, around about 6% drop in demand in 2020 because of COVID. Obviously, factories shutting down or just lockdown for quite a while. So that actually helped us in terms of load shedding. If it wasn't for COVID, we would probably have had a lot more load shedding and a lot sort of sooner. So what we're seeing is that the country is coming out of COVID. We did see an increase in last year in 2021. So there was a higher demand, but still not the levels of pre-COVID.
Yeah, you say here in your statement that it increased by 6.5 terawatt hours, which is a 3% increase compared to 2020. But as you say, you make the point that it's still lower compared to what it was in 2019. Finally, let's talk about the other sort of silver lining in all of this. You highlight that renewables are starting to become a real factor within the energy mix, perhaps not where they should be pitched in the context of us talking about a just energy transition, but we're starting to see a flicker of hope.
Yeah, so I mean, the IPP, so the procurement program has been very successful. Unfortunately, bid window 5 was fairly delayed, but we saw around about almost 7% of the electricity generated last year came from renewables, the likes of wind and solar PV. But still, I mean, it doesn't sound like much, and I suppose it's still fairly early days for renewables in South Africa. But we're still dependent on over 80% of our electricity generated last year was from coal. So things are improving, but we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. All right, I've got to thank you for your time and your insights this evening. That's Warwick Pierce from the CSIR. He's a researcher there, just telling us about their annual statistics on power generation in the country, just giving us a picture of where things stand in as far as the performance of the Eskom plant is concerned.